Welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. This is the podcast where we help you challenge your mindset and discover where you are. Tired of stories about other people's success? We can help you change your life, determine your time freedom point, and join us on the journey to financial success. Let's go. Here we are again on the Ideal Investor Show with another expert guest. And today we have Amy Cook with us, and she comes to us to talk a little bit about money narrative and how we think about money and investing and all those kind of things. But before we get there, Amy, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit how you're doing today.
Hi, Axel. Thanks for having me. My name is Amy Cook, and I am a financial advisor here in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. I've been in this business for 15 years, and I've been in financial services for 20. So I just recently wrote this book about our money narrative, money stories, and excited to talk to you about it.
Yeah, that's very cool. So before you we start talking about the book and the money narrative, tell me a little bit. You said financial services. How did you get into that? Or did you come out of high school and say, that's exactly what I'm going to do? Or how did that happen?
That's a good question. So I started in the mortgage business in the early 2000s. I got married really young. That situation didn't end well. And so I found myself in the workplace, and regular jobs just weren't cutting it. I had 2 little kids. I ended up, starting in the mortgage business, and I saw sort of a pattern that was forming that felt very reactive to financial decisions. And so I started thinking more on a proactive approach, and I ended up on this side of the business where I could help people before they made decisions, and also learning about my own narratives in the process. And so that's kind of how I landed here. But I've always liked talking about money. When I was a little girl, I didn't really play with dolls. I liked to play bank and stack little things of paper and hand envelopes to everybody. So I definitely have an interest.
So did you have a bunch of piggy banks?
Yeah, I did. I actually still collect piggy banks. I love them.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I remember that was kind of a thing when I was young, that everybody in the family, when there was any event like birthdays or other events, Christmas or whatever, there was always, at least in the beginning, there were coins that you could put in the little piggy bank, and then it graduated to bills. And initially, I still remember I squeezed the bills through the little slit there. Ultimately, they obviously clocked in, and then we got something.
It's good to have a piggy bank full of bills, right?
Yeah, my parents ultimately graduated me to what they called a Sparbuch, is basically a savings account in the form of a little booklet. The habit was formed that every time there was something where you had collected a few bills, you would go literally to the bank, and they would write it in and give you a stamp
and
the
stuff. Date, and then they put their little initials next to it. Yeah,
exactly. So that were the good old times. Financial services, what, for our audience, explain a little bit, how broad or narrow that actually is and what it includes.
So I've been in financial services. I've been a financial planner for the last 15. So basically it's, looking at a macro overview of clients' entire picture. So I'm not just looking at one thing. Obviously, I do the investing side, but I want to look at, where they are relative to their goals, if they're on track to achieve those goals, and if not, what they can do now to change that and to shift it a bit. And obviously, the more time we have, the better.
Yeah, obviously. And that's true for the real estate investing stuff that we focus on. Same thing, like the earlier you start and the longer you have, the bigger your portfolio and your passive income can grow. Is there a particular clientele, like a certain income bracket, that you favor, or how does that look like?
That's a good question, because I'm in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. So the assumption is always that it's just the mega wealthy. And I do have tech clients and people who get really nice packages. But I have a lot of, just regular people who have, worked for the same company for 30 plus years and would like to retire, or people that don't want to retire and want to know that they are going to have enough. I would say I kind of work with the emerging affluent versus the ultra affluent, but I do have clients in all age categories. And it's always fun to see people in their 20s that are getting excited about financial planning, because as you know, it's rare.
Very rare. And I still remember a few years ago, I think I mentioned that before we started recording, I did a bunch of consulting work in the Berkeley area. And there was a time when the height of the market, you were eligible for support, for housing support and stuff like that at 103,000 or less, right? Where you would say, wow, 103,000, you would normally think anywhere else in the country is an income where you shouldn't really have to depend on support. But if everything costs $1 million, so
Yeah, it's relative, right?
yeah, exactly. It's all relative. Now, when you say these emerging affluent, can you speak a little bit about some of the patterns you see that they need help with?
Some of the problems.
Well, I like to call it patterns than problems. Like if people believe they should do a certain thing and then they do it and they come to you and you say, well, tell me why you did this.
Well, around here, we do see people that are really heavy in, just their company positions as their portfolio as a whole. And it really does, it happens sort of organically because if, a lot of these jobs, they hand you a bunch of stock. And then over time, you own more and more of it. And if you aren't actively managing that and doing and diversifying, then you've got your paycheck and, a substantial amount of your net worth coming from the same place.
And is it really stock, Amy, or is a lot of it options?
Well, you've got stock and, you've got options. Most common are the RSUs because they kind of keep you there that way. But when someone's first starting out, that might be their entire portfolio as opposed to a career changer who has a diversified portfolio already. The other thing that I see a lot here is such a substantial amount of net worth being tied up in the house because our real estate values are so high.
Right. And so tied up in the house in form of rent or in form of mortgage?
I mean, in form of equity. So when we're looking at, retiring, we have to look at having the liquidity for income streams and retirement. So it's not a bad thing, but a lot of, these people that have been in their homes here for a very long time, you look at the paper and balance sheet looks great, but it's not all accessible.
Understood. I think you jumped the age group with me here real quick from the emerging affluent to the people who are talking about retirement.
Oh, okay. I thought we were just talking about common things in this area.
No, we do. There's no problem. I wasn't fast enough for you. So I'm like,
okay, so on the emerging side, yeah, the challenge would be getting into the house, even with the incomes as high as they are. If you think about, starter homes being north of $1 million, I mean, on the low side, there's still a down payment that they need to, accumulate and put down on the house. And sometimes it's a challenge when tax rates are so high, just getting to that place.
Yeah, and that's actually an interesting point because I run across that too, because a lot of our clients are actually from, like you used the term affluent areas, and I would equate affluent just in the revenue, basically the sheer nominal number of income on first glance looks high compared to other places in the country. So I'm actually a big advocate, and I would love to hear what your opinion is about it, a big advocate to say if you are in an area where through an investment lens, and I'm obviously biased on the real estate investment lens, if you say, okay, a good deal is if I were to try to get this property that I'm eyeing, not for myself as a residence, but as an investment property, could I make basically the 1% rule work? So if it's like theoretically, if you go with what you said with $1 million property, that would mean, would anybody pay $10,000 rent? Right, or $500,000 property, $5,000 rent. If the answer is no, I typically would say, well, then you should rent and invest the money that you would otherwise do for your down payment in properties where that ratio is actually achievable. Right, so you pay basically rent less than the 1% ratio, and you use the money that whatever 100,000 or 200,000 that you would have to do as a down payment in a location where it can actually work for you. What are you thinking about that?
I mean, I think that's a great strategy. I think for me, it's, with clients, over the years, I've noticed that there's not really a one size fits all. Like if I have somebody who comes in and that is at the top of their list that they want to get into a home, then it becomes, if it absolutely doesn't work, like they can't afford it, that's a whole different story. But if it is achievable, then I help them put together a plan to get there. And sometimes it might be, like you said, if someone has, a pretty decent rent and they're not, so adamantly looking to purchase a home and they're not even sure they want to stay in the area, then I encourage them to look at, sort of an offset account, an accumulation account, so that it's not like, well, I can't do it now, so maybe someday. Well, then where's the money going to come from someday?
Yeah.
So, it's sometimes it takes time to get there. And that's true with, the majority of, what financial planning in general is that, it's not always now.
Yeah.
It's a process.
Totally. And I'm very glad it shows that, we are the right two people on the show today, because I use exactly the same word, accumulation account. So,
Oh, you do?
yeah, I
Oh,
do.
that's
Because
great.
I mean, conceptually, I think it is. And we're using it in our approach for, you say, okay, well, I can find a better performance ratio if I rent, invest in a property that generates cash flow for me, and then I put that cash flow in an accumulation account, because that investment property obviously appreciates. Tenants pay me income, passive income, that I can put in my accumulation account. And I get some little other benefits like depreciation and a few things like that. But it can then be used for two things. At the point in time in the future that you're aiming for, you can either say, okay, now that I'm getting accumulation account money, and it can be both from an investment property and whatever you put aside each month based on, what you, Amy, will to say how should your financial plan look like, to grow a certain number that you deem necessary for wherever you want to either buy a residence or do another investment. But it's also habit forming, right? If you consistently putting certain amounts in certain places, including the accumulation account, to plan for some goal, something that you want to do in the future. So that's how, and I think that sounds pretty much aligned with in the general direction that you would also go, right?
I think that the key is, like you said, putting it in. I'm a big fan of separate accounts for things.
Yeah.
So that it gets done, because when you throw everything in the same bucket, anything can come up and it can disappear a lot easier than if you have it labeled as what it's for. And then there's the discipline. You have to do it. And that's why it's valuable to have people like us, on a team, just from an accountability standpoint, and someone checking in and making sure that you're on track.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with this. And, we have, for example, in my business, become quite fond of finding these accounts that also make sure that you have liquidity. One of the ones, and I'm saying this a little bit more towards our audience, is American Express high yield savings account that is paying like 4.3% interest, and you can take your money in and out any day. Right. So that's kind of like a nice thing where you, at least right now, making some inflation covering or slightly above inflation interest, rather than just a straight out savings account that the bank may offer you. Now you can do other things, obviously, but that's at least something that is a little better.
Oh, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. There's so many people that have their money just sitting in one of the big banks, would have to say who they all are, and they don't even realize that they're not earning anything on that money. And I always say, the bank's not going to call you up and say, hey, we're only giving you 0.5%. Do you want more?
Right.
So it's, it's up to us to, kind of grab that. And the high yield, savings accounts are nothing to sneeze at these days. It adds up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, anybody can do compound interest. There are so many calculators on Google these days that you can just put it in and see what it does, right? Now, let's transition a little bit to the book. Tell me a little bit, what was the motivation and what's the core content in the book, Your Money Narrative?
So Your Money Narrative is really, it's a group of fictional stories just about common financial dilemmas. And I have found over the years, a lot of people don't really like all of the high tech financial jargon and talk. And there's like this sense of dread for some people in talking about money, that I think it needs to be simplified. So I've always tried to simplify the process, and I think that by putting it into stories and getting to the heart of why we're making the decisions we are helps, and it's relatable. So my hope with the book was really that vastly different characters that maybe you relate to one or two of the stories, or someone and then there's just some really basic action steps and things in there too. But it's really just thinking about, hey, what am I bringing to the table that's affecting, my decisions on a day-to-day basis? Because we form these things early on, and then we kind of carry them through life, and sometimes we don't even know we're doing it. And so there might be a big fear around money, or a fear around certain types of investments, or a fear around investing at all, or a guilt around even having money. And so there's just a lot of things that we inherently just kind of bring with us, and everyone is different. So if it's not working for you, then it's a good time to start kind of questioning, like, is that real? Is that really, does that make sense? It doesn't happen overnight.
Absolutely. Although I've found, and I wonder if you had similar experience, that this aspect about it's not working for you, that's kind of almost like you have to take yourself to some sort of a meta perspective and looking at your stuff as if you were an outsider or like an observer or something like that. I've met so many people who have done certain things for sometimes more than a decade, and when you ask them why, the answer is pretty much, well, because I've always done it that way. I don't even really know why I'm doing it anymore. But they didn't ever take themselves to this kind of, okay, let's just look at the big picture and see what all the pieces are. So, I mean, obviously, that's something that you would do. In this context, I'm sure that you're cherishing every single one of the stories, but is there one, like your favorite that you would be willing to share with us?
Oh gosh, yeah, it's hard. I mean, one of the stories is, I write about myself a lot through the book, but one of the stories is about collecting and hobbies, and it addresses the guilt around that some people have around doing things for themselves or buying things for themselves. And so the storyline in the beginning is about a guy who collects cars, but he's in a financially stable position to where he's able to do so, and he feels really guilty about it. And really, he doesn't need to. And I think that that's the goal with financial planning, is to have the steps in place, and if you know that you're doing those things that you need to do, instead of it being a constricting process, it's actually a freeing process, because you know where everything's at, you know that you're on track or you're not on track, and then it frees you to do more of the things that you want to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. So on this topic of collectibles, are you okay with your clients doing that, or would you encourage it or discourage it?
Oh, no, I'm absolutely okay with, I mean, we have to have things. I mean, I'm a big collector, so I talk about a typewriter. I'm known as, I've got the massive typewriter collection, which is a whole other story, but it's okay to do things for ourselves. If we're doing the things that we need to do for our legacy planning, our retirement planning, our estate planning, and all of that, it's okay. You can have them. Some people want to spend their money on travel. So I think the goal is really to figure out what you really want, what's ideal, where do you want to be. And for some, it could be collecting. For some, it could be travel. For some, it could be never retiring, and that's okay. But I think at the core of it, we don't want to run out of money, and we want safety and security, and we want to take care of our families and the people that we love. And so that's really what it's about.
I think in a similar way about it, like you were just describing. Although I like to ask people, what is the thing that brings joy in collecting, right? And some people, like when you say typewriters or cars or stuff like that, it might be the engineering or preserving something from the past or so forth. Because if I'm asked, like what would you collect, then I would say something like gold coins or silver coins or stuff like that, right? So it's a tangible asset that also has kind of like an artistic value. But oftentimes people already have their things that they're into, right? So they don't.
Well, money can be a collection too. See, I like the stories behind the coins. I mean, it was, early forms of bartering and exchange and trade, and so I think that anything that, whatever it is, there's, there's probably something that triggers that piece inside of you that wants to collect that thing. But it's not even just about the collecting. It's more about just money on yourself or whatever it is that you want to do.
Cool. So if somebody would want to get their hands on the book, or want to say, hey, I want to see some of the other stories, can I talk to Amy? How would they do that?
on all the bookstores, on Amazon. There's Audible, there's a Kindle version, and then obviously the hard copy of that there. Or you can go to the website, which is just yourmoneynarrative.com.
Cool. And then if they want to get some help with either collecting or planning or...
Oh, I don't help with collecting. that would be your category if they're
storytelling, maybe.
What's that?
Storytelling.
Yeah. If they want help with financial planning, you can go to my website at mavenlanefinancialgroup.com. And I do have different planning packages and ways that I work with clients on there. And there's a contact page if you want to get in touch with us.
Right, exactly. So we're going to put that site on the show notes. And then also you said to me, if they want to get directly to the book, it's the same website +/ideas, so they can find the landing page basically for where the book is and the contact and stuff, right?
Yeah, actually, the book website is yourmoneynarrative.com, and then the site for this podcast is my regular website, Maven Lane Financial Group /ideal.
Okay, cool. Right, so we got that all out. Now I can ask you the last two questions. If you could meet anybody, who would it be and why?
Right now, I'd like to meet Tom Hanks because he's a big typewriter collector too. So I'd like to have a little typewriter conversation with him.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. That's a good reason too. Okay, and then the last question I asked every guest is, Amy, if you had a time machine, you could go forward, backward, anywhere, where would you go and why?
As a lover of old things, normally I would I want to go back in time. I want to see these different periods of time. But I think with everything evolving the way it is and being a woman, I think I'd jump forward 50 years and take a peek into what's going on and, are robots running the world? And then I just kind of come back with that information. I think it would be valuable.
Absolutely. When you go, can you also check if we have a city on Mars?
Yeah. 50 years. I don't know. We're moving real fast these days, so who knows? History seems to repeat itself, so who knows? I don't know if I'll be around in 50 years to see, so maybe we should do a time machine.
I definitely won't be. But I hold up some hope that maybe some smarter minds prevail, if we get a new planet to try.
There you go. But is it going to be the same people on the new planet?
For one generation,
There you go.
All right, Amy, it was a great pleasure to have you on the show, and maybe we can do it again sometime in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.